The penthouse sat high above the city, quiet except for the soft hum of climate control and the distant wail of sirens far below. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed a glittering skyline, but inside the light felt cold, sterile like a museum no one visited. In the middle of the living room, a small girl sat cross-legged on a plush rug, her fingers tracing the raised bumps of a Braille book. Her name was Clara, and she hadn't seen the view in over 2 years. She used to love watching raindrops race down the glass, counting stars with her mother before bedtime, picking out the red balloons at the park. But all that changed after the accident. The screech of tires, the shattering glass, the silence that followed. The doctor said her optic nerves were damaged beyond repair. Since then, the world had become sound, scent, texture, and memory. Her father rarely came home before midnight. When he did, he moved like a ghost. Soft footsteps, hushed phone calls, the clink of ice in a glass. He loved her, she knew that. But grief had wrapped itself around him like a heavy coat he couldn't take off. He hired people, therapists, tutors, specialists, but none of them stayed long. Some talked down to her. Others treated her like she was made of glass. Clara stopped trusting new faces. Then came Evelyn. She didn't knock or announce herself with too much cheer. She just showed up one Tuesday morning, wearing a simple navy dress and carrying a small woven bag. Her voice was calm, warm, not sugary, not stiff. "Good morning, Clara," she said, kneeling so they were at eye level even though Clara couldn't see her. "My name's Evelyn. I hear you like piano music." Clara tilted her head. "How'd you know that?" I asked, Evelyn said simply. "And I brought something for you." She pulled out a small music box. When she opened it, a gentle version of Claire de Lune began to play. Clara's face lit up. She reached out and Evelyn guided her hands to the smooth wood, the tiny dancer inside, the winding key on the side. From that moment, something shifted. Evelyn didn't hover. She didn't fill every silence with chatter. She taught Clara to see with her hands, how to tell rosemary from thyme by smell, how to feel the difference between silk and cotton, how to map the apartment by counting steps and listening to echoes. She read stories with voices for each character, made up songs about brushing teeth and folding laundry, turned rainy afternoons into adventures with blankets and flashlights, even if Clara couldn't see the light. She loved the warmth. Slowly, Clara started laughing again, real laughs, the kind that bubbled up from her chest. She began asking questions. "What color is your voice? Does the moon feel cold? Can you describe the ocean without using the word blue?" Evelyn always answered honestly, poetically, never dumbing things down. Upstairs, the billionaire watched it all through the security feed in his study. He'd installed cameras after the accident. Not to spy, he told himself, but to keep Clara safe. But lately, he found himself watching longer than necessary. He saw how Evelyn sat on the floor with Clara for hours, building towers out of wooden blocks, how she never flinched when Clara got frustrated and knocked them over. He saw the way Clara leaned into Evelyn's side during thunderstorms, how her breathing slowed when Evelyn hummed old spirituals. He hadn't heard his daughter hum in over a year. He wanted to thank Evelyn, but every time he tried to speak to her, words stuck in his throat. He was used to boardrooms, negotiations, commanding attention with a glance, but this quiet, steady kindness left him speechless. He didn't know how to talk to someone who wasn't trying to sell him something or impress him. One evening he came home early. Clara was asleep on the couch, head resting on Evelyn's lap. Evelyn was reading aloud, her fingers gently braiding a loose strand of Clara's hair. The room was lit only by a single lamp casting soft shadows. He stood in the doorway unnoticed. For the first time in years, the penthouse didn't feel empty. It felt lived in, warm, human. Evelyn looked up and saw him. She didn't jump or scramble to her feet. She just gave a small, respectful nod and kept reading, her voice unwavering. He cleared his throat. "You can go for the night," he said, his tone rougher than he meant it to be. Evelyn closed the book gently. "She had a hard day," she said quietly. "Nightmares. I promised I'd stay until she fell into deep sleep." He hesitated. "I could appreciate that," she smiled faintly. "She's a strong girl. Just needs someone to remind her." He didn't know what to say to that, so he nodded and walked away, but not before glancing back once. Evelyn had already returned to stroking Clara's hair, humming that same soft tune. Later that night, alone in his study, he pulled up Evelyn's file. Not just her resume, her background check, references, even an old interview she'd done with a nonprofit years ago. She'd worked with blind children before, yes, but she'd also lost her younger brother to a hit and run when she was 19. The driver was never caught. She'd dropped out of college to help raise her nieces. She lived in a modest apartment in the Bronx, took 2 buses to get to work, and never once asked for overtime pay. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. For all his wealth, his power, his influence, he couldn't give his daughter what this woman gave her effortlessly: peace. The next morning, he found Evelyn in the kitchen making pancakes shaped like stars and moons, Clara's request. He poured himself coffee and stood by the counter. "You don't have to shape them," he said awkwardly. "She can't see them." Evelyn flipped a pancake without looking up. "She can't see them," she said gently, "but she can feel them. And she can imagine them. Imagination's a kind of sight, too." He didn't answer right away. Then quietly, "Keep doing what you're doing." It wasn't much, but it was the closest he'd come to saying thank you. That afternoon, Clara asked Evelyn to teach her how to make the pancakes. Evelyn guided her hands over the bowl, letting her feel the batter's thickness, the sizzle of the pan, the puff of steam when the pancake cooked. Clara grinned, flour on her nose, completely in the moment. From his office doorway, the billionaire watched again. But this time, he didn't feel like an outsider looking in. For the first time since the accident, he felt hope. Not the kind bought with money, but the kind grown slowly, patiently, by someone who knew how to listen. And somewhere deep inside, something long buried began to stir. Not just in Clara, but in him too. The charity gala was held in a grand ballroom downtown, all crystal chandeliers and hushed conversations over champagne flutes. Clara had never been to anything like it. She clung to Evelyn's arm as they stepped inside, overwhelmed by the swirl of voices, the clinking of glasses, the rustle of expensive fabric. The air smelled like perfume and polished wood. "It's okay," Evelyn whispered, squeezing her hand gently. "Just stay close. I'll tell you what's happening." Clara nodded, her fingers tightening around Evelyn's sleeve. She wore a soft lavender dress with tiny pearl buttons. Evelyn had helped her pick it out, describing how it shimmered like morning light on water. Her father had insisted she attend. "People need to see you," he'd said. Though Evelyn suspected he really meant he needed people to see him as a devoted father, not just a powerful businessman. Evelyn stayed near Clara all evening, guiding her through the crowd, describing faces, outfits, even the layout of the room. "There's a long table with desserts to our left. Tiny cakes, fruit tarts, something chocolate that smells amazing. To our right, a string quartet is playing near the grand piano." Clara relaxed a little, curiosity replacing her nerves. She loved music, and the live strings wrapped around her like a warm blanket. That's when he appeared. He wasn't loud or flashy. In fact, he stood slightly apart from the main group, observing more than mingling. But Evelyn noticed him right away, not because he was handsome, though he was, but because he carried himself differently. Calm, grounded, like he didn't need the room to notice him. He approached them politely, not with the usual forced smile of the wealthy guests, but with quiet respect. "Evening," he said, his voice low and steady. "I couldn't help but admire how you're helping her navigate all this." Evelyn gave a small nod. "She's doing the hard part. I'm just along for the ride." He smiled, just a little, and turned to Clara. "You must be the young pianist I've heard about." Clara perked up. "You've heard me play? Your father mentioned it at the donor meeting last week. Said you learned Chopin by ear." Clara beamed. "It's my favorite." They talked for a few minutes about music, about how sound paints pictures in the mind. He didn't talk down to her. He listened. Really listened. When he left to greet someone else, Clara sighed happily. "He didn't treat me like I'm broken." Evelyn's chest tightened. "No, he didn't." Later, near the dessert table, things went wrong. One of the security guards, new, overly eager, spotted Evelyn reaching into her bag to give Clara a small snack she'd packed. The gala food was too rich for Clara's stomach. He stepped forward sharply. "Ma'am, step away from the bag. No outside items allowed." Evelyn froze. "It's just a banana muffin." "For her. She's staff," another guest muttered loud enough to be heard. "Shouldn't even be eating here." Clara's face fell. Evelyn felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her voice calm. I'm her aide. She has dietary needs. The guard wasn't backing down. You'll need to leave the bag with us for inspection. Before Evelyn could respond, the man from earlier reappeared. Is there a problem? He asked, his tone firm but not aggressive. The guard straightened. Just following protocol, sir. The man looked at Evelyn, then at Clara, who was now gripping Evelyn's hand tightly, her lower lip trembling. This woman is accompanying a guest with a disability, he said evenly. She's not a threat. Let her do her job. Something in his voice made the guard hesitate. Then he nodded stiffly and stepped back. After a quiet moment, the man turned to Evelyn. I'm sorry you had to deal with that. It's not the first time, she said quietly. He studied her for a beat. You handle it with more grace than most would. They stood in silence for a moment, the noise of the party fading into the background. Then he said, I'm with the U.S. Attorney's Office. Federal Prosecutor. Evelyn's eyes widened slightly. She'd heard rumors, whispers that her employer was under investigation for financial irregularities. She'd tried not to think about it. Her job was Clara, not boardroom scandals. You're investigating him, she said, not as an accusation but as a quiet fact. He didn't deny it. I follow the evidence. That's all, she nodded. Fair enough. He hesitated, then added, but I don't believe a child should suffer because of adult mistakes. Something in his words felt honest. Not performative, real. Before they could say more, Clara tugged Evelyn's sleeve. Can we go home? My head hurts. Of course, Evelyn said, turning to the man. Thank you for stepping in. Any time, he said. And for a second, their eyes met. Long enough for Evelyn to feel a strange flutter, like a door had cracked open somewhere inside her. The ride home was quiet. Clara fell asleep against Evelyn's shoulder in the back of the town car. Evelyn stared out the window, replaying the evening. The way the prosecutor had looked at Clara, not with pity but with genuine interest. The way he'd stood up for her without making a scene. The way he'd said, I follow the evidence, like it was a promise. Not just a job description. Back at the penthouse, Evelyn tucked Clara into bed, smoothed her hair, and whispered a lullaby until her breathing deepened. Downstairs, she found her employer in the study, still in his tuxedo, staring at his phone. You left early, he said. Not looking up? Clara was overwhelmed. He finally met her eyes. Did you talk to that prosecutor? Evelyn didn't flinch. He spoke to Clara about music. Then he helped when security got aggressive. His jaw tightened. He's not here to make friends. I know, Evelyn said simply. But he treated your daughter like a person, not a prop. He looked away, but she saw the flicker of shame cross his face. A few days later, Evelyn received a plain envelope at her apartment. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a phone number and a note. If you ever need legal advice, no strings. She stared at it for a long time. She didn't call, but she didn't throw it away either. Meanwhile, things at the penthouse grew tense. Security cameras multiplied. Conversation stopped when Evelyn entered a room. One afternoon, while helping Clara with her Braille homework, she overheard two staff members whispering in the hallway. They say the prosecutor's building a case. That the boss might go to jail. Hope they don't blame the help, another replied. Especially her. Evelyn's stomach dropped. She said nothing, but that night she lay awake, wondering if staying was putting Clara or herself at risk. The next morning, Clara was unusually quiet. During their walk in the private garden on the building's roof, she suddenly stopped and said, Do you think Daddy's in trouble? Evelyn knelt beside her. Why do you ask? I heard him yelling on the phone. He said someone was trying to take everything. Clara's voice trembled. Is he going to leave me? Evelyn took both of Clara's hands in hers. No one is taking you away from him. And no matter what happens, I'll be right here. But even as she said it, doubt crept in. How long could she stay if the walls started closing in? Later that week, the prosecutor showed up again, this time at the building's lobby. He wasn't in a suit, just a button-down shirt and jeans holding 2 paper cups of coffee. I was in the neighborhood, he said when Evelyn came down, surprised. Thought you might need this. He handed her a cup. Oat milk, 1 sugar, Clara told me last time. Evelyn blinked. You remembered. I pay attention. They stood there for a moment, the city humming around them. Then he said, I know things are complicated right now. But if anyone tries to pressure you, threaten you, or make you feel unsafe, you call me. Day or night." She looked into his eyes and saw no agenda. "Just sincerity. Why?" she asked softly. "Why do you care?" He didn't look away. "Because everyone deserves to be seen for who they really are. Not their job. Not their bank account. Not their mistakes." He paused. "You see Clara, truly see her. That matters." Evelyn felt something shift inside her, something fragile but real. Hope, maybe, or trust. She took a sip of coffee. It was perfect. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone. Tension settled over the penthouse like a thick fog. It started small. Locked doors that used to be open, hushed phone calls that stopped the moment Evelyn walked into a room, a new security guard who watched her a little too closely. Clara noticed it too. She'd tilt her head, listening, then whisper, "Why does it feel like everyone's holding their breath?" Evelyn didn't have a good answer. She just held Clara's hand tighter and kept doing what she always did. Reading stories, practicing piano, walking through the apartment, naming every object by touch. But even those routines felt fragile now, like glass balanced on the edge of a table. One afternoon, her employer called her into his study. He didn't offer her a seat. He stood by the window, back turned, voice tight. "There's been a leak," he said. "Confidential information from my office ended up in the hands of federal investigators." Evelyn's stomach dropped. "I don't know anything about your business, don't I?" He finally turned, eyes shadowed with exhaustion and suspicion. "You've been spending time with that prosecutor. Seen him more than once." "I ran into him in the lobby," she said evenly. "He gave me coffee. That's all." He studied her, searching for a lie. She met his gaze without flinching. After a long pause, he sighed and rubbed his temples. "I can't afford distractions right now. Not with everything on the line." "Clara isn't a distraction," Evelyn said quietly. "She's your daughter." He looked away again. "Just be careful who you talk to." That night, Evelyn sat on her tiny couch in her Bronx apartment, staring at the phone number she'd kept tucked in her journal. She hadn't called, but she thought about it more each day. Not because she wanted to get involved in the case, she didn't, but because she was starting to feel like a target. And if they came for her, what would happen to Clara? A few days later, the prosecutor showed up again, this time not in the lobby but near the park where Evelyn sometimes took Clara on weekends. He was sitting on a bench reading a file but closed it the moment he saw her. "Didn't mean to startle you," he said, standing. "I was just nearby." She gave a small smile. "You keep saying that." He shrugged, but there was warmth in his eyes. "Maybe I like your company." They walked slowly along the path, Clara between them, holding both their hands. She chatted happily about the ducks in the pond, the smell of wet grass, the way the breeze felt like invisible fingers. The prosecutor listened, asked questions, made her laugh. For a little while, the weight lifted. When they reached the bench again, he turned to Evelyn. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." She tensed. "Okay. Has he ever said anything at all about hiding documents? Or pressuring employees to lie?" She shook her head. "No, but..." She hesitated. "He's scared. And when he's scared, he gets quiet. Withdraws. Clara feels it more than anyone." He nodded slowly. "Fear makes people do strange things." They sat in silence for a moment. Then he said, "I'm not trying to hurt him. I'm trying to find the truth. And if he's innocent of the worst of it, I'll make sure that's known." Evelyn looked at him. "Why tell me this?" "Because I trust you," he said simply. "And because I think you care more about that little girl than anyone else in that building." Her throat tightened. She didn't know what to say. After that day, their meetings became quiet rituals, brief, careful, always in public. Sometimes just a coffee, sometimes a walk. Never anything that could be twisted. But in those moments, Evelyn began to see the man behind the title. He talked about growing up in a neighborhood not so different from hers, about losing his older brother to street violence, about choosing law because he believed in fairness, even when it was hard. One evening, as rain began to fall, they stood under the awning of a bookstore. Clara was already home asleep. "You ever wonder," he said, watching the raindrops race down the glass, "if doing the right thing is worth all the loneliness it brings?" Evelyn thought about her brother, gone too soon, justice never served. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but I'd rather be lonely and honest than comfortable and dishonest." He looked at her then, not with pity, not with admiration, but with recognition. Like he saw himself in her words. Their connection deepened, but so did the pressure at home. One morning, Evelyn arrived to find Clara crying in her room. Her favorite music box, the one Evelyn had given her, was missing. "They took it," Clara sobbed. "Said it might have a recording thing inside." Evelyn's blood ran cold. "Who said that?" "The new man. The one with the stiff voice. She found her employer in the kitchen, sipping black coffee." "You had her music box searched?" she asked, voice low but steady. "It's procedure," he said, not meeting her eyes. "Until this investigation is over, nothing's off limits." "That music box is the only thing that helps her sleep when she's scared," Evelyn said. "It's not a weapon. It's comfort." He finally looked at her, and for the first time she saw real pain beneath the anger. "I'm trying to protect her," he said hoarsely. "From everything. From me, maybe." Evelyn softened slightly. "Then let her keep the things that make her feel safe." He didn't answer, but later that day, the music box was back on Clara's nightstand, cleaned. Wound playing softly, still the atmosphere grew heavier. Evelyn started noticing things. How Clara flinched at sudden noises, how she asked fewer questions. How she clung to Evelyn's sleeve like she was afraid of being left behind. Then came the night Clara whispered something that changed everything. They were in bed. The city lights painting soft patterns on the ceiling Clara couldn't see. "Before the accident," she said quietly, "I heard Daddy arguing with someone. He said if those files disappear, no one will ever know." Evelyn froze. "When was this?" "The night before the car crash. I was supposed to be asleep, but I couldn't. I heard him in his office." Evelyn's mind raced. That detail about files disappearing had never been public. If true, it could mean her employer knew more than he claimed. Or it could mean he was being set up. She held Clara close. "Thank you for telling me." The next day she wrestled with what to do. If she told the prosecutor, she'd be betraying the man who employed her. But if she stayed silent, Clara might carry that secret alone and justice might never be served. That evening, she met the prosecutor at the same park bench. Rain threatened again, but neither of them moved. "I need to tell you something," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "But I need you to promise me Clara comes first, always." He looked at her, serious. "I promise." She told him everything Clara had said. He listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he exhaled slowly. "That changes things. Will it hurt her?" Evelyn asked, fear sharp in her chest. "Not if I handle it right," he said. "But I need to verify it. There might be audio from the building's security system that night. If I can get a warrant." He didn't finish. "He didn't have to," Evelyn nodded. "Do what you have to do. But protect her." "I will," he said, and this time she believed him. Walking home, Evelyn felt a strange mix of dread and relief. She'd crossed a line, but for the first time she felt like she wasn't just a caretaker. She was a guardian. And maybe, just maybe, doing the right thing wouldn't leave her alone after all. The days after Evelyn shared Clara's secret felt like walking on thin ice. Every ring of the doorbell, every unfamiliar car outside the building made her pulse jump. She kept her routine steady for Clara. Same songs, same stories, same gentle rhythm. But inside she braced for impact. She didn't know what the prosecutor would find or what it would cost. Then one rainy Thursday he called. "I got the warrant," he said, voice low but clear. "We pulled the security audio from that night, the night before the accident. There's a recording." Evelyn held her breath. "And there's a conversation," he said. "But it's not who we thought. Your employer isn't the one talking about hiding files. It's his chief financial officer. He's pressuring your employer to sign off on something shady, and your employer refuses. Then the CFO says, 'If you don't play along, I'll make sure those files disappear and you'll take the fall.'" Evelyn sank onto her kitchen chair. "So he didn't do it?" "No," the prosecutor said. "He was trying to stop it. But after the accident, he was so broken, so focused on Clara, he never followed up. The CFO took over, covered his tracks, and let everyone assume the worst about the boss." Relief washed over her, but it was short-lived. "What happens now?" "I'm bringing the CFO in," he said, "and I'll make sure your employer knows the truth. But Evelyn, this might get messy before it gets clean." She knew he was right. That evening, she found Clara curled up on the piano bench, fingers resting on the keys but not playing. "You're quiet," Evelyn said, sitting beside her. "I had a dream," Clara whispered. "That Daddy went away and never came back." Evelyn wrapped an arm around her. "He's not going anywhere. But what if he did something bad?" "He made mistakes," Evelyn said carefully. "But he loves you more than anything. And sometimes loving someone means protecting them even from the truth." Clara was quiet for a long time. Then she asked, "Do you think I did the right thing?" "Telling you what I heard?" Evelyn kissed the top of her head. "Yes, because truth matters, even when it's hard." The next morning, everything changed. Her employer called her into the study again, but this time he looked different. Not angry, not guarded, just tired and sad. "I spoke with the prosecutor," he said, voice rough. "He played me the recording." Evelyn waited. "He told me everything Clara said." "And the audio?" "It proves I didn't do what they accused me of. But it also proves I wasn't paying attention. I let someone I trusted run things while I shut down after the accident." He looked at her, eyes glistening. "I failed her. And I failed my company." Evelyn didn't offer empty comfort. "You can't change the past," she said gently. "But you can choose what comes next," he nodded slowly. "I'm going to cooperate fully. Turn over everything. Let them clean house." He paused. "I was so afraid of losing control that I lost sight of what really mattered." For the first time, he sounded like a father, not a billionaire, not a target, just a man trying to do better. Later that week, the news broke. The CFO was arrested. The company issued a public statement taking responsibility for oversight failures. Her employer held a press conference, not to defend himself, but to apologize. He didn't mention Clara, but Evelyn saw the shift in him. He came home earlier, sat with Clara during dinner, asked Evelyn how her day was, not as an employer, but as someone who cared. One night, as Evelyn helped Clara get ready for bed, the man appeared in the doorway. "He held a small box, Clara," he said softly. "I know I haven't been the dad you needed, but I want to try." Clara turned toward his voice, uncertain. He stepped closer and opened the box. Inside was a new music box, bigger, more intricate, with a tiny dancer that twirled to Claire de Lune. "I had it made," he said. "Just for you." Clara reached out and he guided her hands to it. She wound it slowly, and when the music began, a tear slipped down her cheek. "Thank you, Daddy," she whispered. He knelt beside her bed, something breaking open in his chest. "I'm sorry it took me so long." Evelyn quietly slipped out, giving them space. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall, heart full. This was why she stayed. Not for the money, not for the penthouse, but for moments like this. Fragile, honest, healing. But her own story wasn't finished. A few days later, the prosecutor met her at the park again. The sun was out, kids laughing on the swings, the city humming with ordinary life. "It's over," he said. "Case closed. Charges against your employer dropped. The CFO's facing serious time." She let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. "And Clara?" "Her statement helped," he said. "But I kept her out of the spotlight. No interviews, no court, just a quiet note in the file." She looked at him, really looked. "You kept your promise." "I tried to," he said. Then after a pause, "I've been thinking about us." Evelyn's heart skipped. "There is no us, not really. You're a federal prosecutor. I'm a woman who takes care of a blind child. And yet," he said gently, "we keep finding each other in the middle of all this mess." She smiled faintly. "Maybe we're both just tired of being alone." He reached into his coat and pulled out 2 tickets. "And there's a jazz concert Saturday night. Small place. Good music. No cameras, no crowds, just sound." She looked at the tickets, then at him. "What if someone sees us? What if it looks bad for your job?" He shrugged. "Then I'll say I was off duty, and I was with someone who reminds me why justice matters, not just as a job, but as a human being." Evelyn thought of Clara's laughter, of late-night talks on park benches, of the way he'd stood up for her when no one else would. She thought of how in a world full of power plays and hidden agendas he'd chosen honesty. She took the tickets. "Just one condition," she said. "Name it. You pick me up. And you bring coffee. Oat milk, 1 sugar," he laughed, a real, warm sound, and for the first time in a long time, Evelyn felt something bloom inside her, not just hope, but the quiet certainty that doing the right thing could lead to something beautiful. The city felt different in the weeks that followed, not quieter exactly, but softer around the edges. The headlines moved on to other scandals, other names. Inside the penthouse, the air no longer carried that heavy silence. Instead, there was music. Clara practicing scales on the piano, humming along as her fingers found their way across the keys. There were voices, too. Her father joining her for breakfast, asking about her day, actually listening to the answers. Evelyn watched it all unfold like a slow sunrise. She still came every morning, still helped Clara dress, still read to her at night. But now she wasn't just staff. She was part of the rhythm of the home. Her employer had stopped calling her the help. He asked her opinion on schools, on therapists, on whether Clara was ready for sleepaway camp designed for blind children. And when she said yes, gently, firmly, he didn't argue. He trusted her. That trust meant more than any paycheck. One Saturday morning, Evelyn arrived to find Clara bouncing on her toes near the front door, a small backpack slung over her shoulder. "We're going to the school today," she announced. "For a tour?" Evelyn smiled. "You're excited." "I'm nervous too," Clara admitted, lowering her voice. "What if the other kids don't like me?" "They'll love you," Evelyn said, kneeling to adjust the strap on her bag. "Because you're kind." "And funny. And you play Chopin like a dream," Clara grinned. "Will you come with us?" Of course. The school was in a quiet part of the city, tucked behind tall trees and brick walls. It wasn't fancy, but it was full of light. Real light, the kind that poured through windows and danced on wooden floors. Teachers greeted Clara by name, showed her the music room with its grand piano, the tactile garden where students grew herbs they could identify by touch and smell, the library lined with Braille books and audiobooks. Clara's face lit up with every new discovery. She ran her hands over a 3D map of the solar system, laughed when a guide dog puppy licked her fingers, and sat perfectly still as a teacher played a violin just for her. On the ride home, she was quiet. Evelyn thought she might be overwhelmed until Clara whispered, "I think I belong there." Her father, sitting in the front seat, reached back and squeezed her knee. "Then that's where you'll go." Evelyn saw the shift in him, not just acceptance, but pride. He wasn't trying to shield Clara from the world anymore. He was helping her step into it. Back at the penthouse, he asked Evelyn to stay for dinner. Not as an employee, but as a guest. They ate at the small table by the kitchen window, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, Clara's favorite apple crisp. No staff hovering, just the three of them talking, laughing, passing dishes like any ordinary family. After dessert, he cleared his throat. "I've been thinking," he said, looking at Evelyn. "I don't want you to leave." She paused. "I'm not going anywhere as long as Clara needs me." "That's not what I mean." He took a breath. "I'd like you to stay on, not just as her aide, but as someone she can count on long term. Maybe even help shape the foundation I'm starting for kids like her. You understand her world in a way I never could." Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. This wasn't just a job offer. It was an invitation to be seen, valued, included. "I'd be honored," she said softly. He nodded, relief washing over his face. Then almost shyly he added, "And thank you for not giving up on us." She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Some things are worth fighting for. Meanwhile, her own life was changing too. The prosecutor, Daniel, though she still rarely used his name out loud, had kept his word. Their Saturday night at the jazz club had been exactly as promised. No cameras, no pressure, just two people listening to music in the dim glow of string lights. They'd talked for hours after the show ended, walking through quiet streets, sharing stories about childhood loss, dreams they'd almost forgotten. He never pushed, never assumed. He just showed up, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with a book he thought Clara might like, sometimes with nothing but his presence and a quiet, "How are you really doing?" One evening, as they sat on a bench overlooking the river, he turned to her. "I know this isn't simple," he said. "You've got responsibilities, a life built around someone else's needs. But I want you to know, I'm not going anywhere, however long it takes." Evelyn looked at him, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. "I spent so much of my life taking care of others," she said. "I forgot what it felt like to be cared for." He didn't say anything. He just took her hand and held it, steady, warm, sure. Now, months later, Evelyn stood in Central Park on a crisp autumn morning. Leaves crunched underfoot, golden and red, and the air smelled like cinnamon and earth. Clara walked beside her, holding her hand, her white cane tapping gently against the path. I can smell the horses, Clara said, grinning. You always do? Evelyn laughed. They stopped near the lake where ducks glided across the water. Clara tilted her face toward the sun, eyes closed, soaking in the warmth. Do you think Daddy will come to my recital next month? I know he will, Evelyn said. And Daniel? Evelyn smiled. If I ask him nicely, Clara giggled. He likes you. He's a good man, Evelyn said simply. From a distance near the park entrance, Daniel stood watching, not intruding, just present. He wore a light jacket, hands in his pockets, a quiet smile on his face. He didn't wave. He didn't need to. Evelyn saw him, and that was enough. Later, as they walked back toward the street, Clara squeezed Evelyn's hand. You're happy now, aren't you? Evelyn thought about it. Not because she had more money or a fancier life, but because she was surrounded by people who saw her, truly saw her. Because she'd helped heal a broken family. Because she'd found someone who walked beside her, not ahead or behind. Yes, she said, I am. And in that moment, with the sun on her face and Clara's laughter ringing in her ears, Evelyn knew. Sometimes the most extraordinary things grow from the simplest acts. A kind word, a steady hand, the courage to tell the truth. Life wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was more than enough.